I still remember the first time I heard her scream. "Stop! You're destroying my son's inheritance." The roar of my chainsaw cut off mid-bite, leaving nothing but the echo of her words drifting through the pine-scented air. A white Mercedes idled in a cloud of dust on my dirt road. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd never walked on gravel before, blonde highlights, designer jeans, and a face red enough to match her nails. She stood there like she owned the mountain. I stood there holding a chainsaw. And in that silence, something inside me said, "Here we go again." 6 months earlier, I'd been sitting in a half-empty apartment wondering how everything had gone wrong so fast. 20 years of marriage gone. House sold. Dreams scattered. My name's Marcus Holloway. And after the divorce, I had exactly $37,000, a set of my grandfather's tools, and a note that said, "Build something that matters." He was the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands. When I was 12, he taught me how to see the soul in a piece of wood, how each grain told a story. Maybe that's why, at 2 a.m. one night, scrolling through county auction listings, I found my second chance. A photograph stopped me cold, a weathered 1873 log cabin sitting on 15 acres of forgotten land in a place called Birchwood Valley. Population 800 and change. The listing said, "as is." To me, that meant, as possible. Auction day felt like a bar fight in slow motion. My $47,000 beat out a kid in a BMW who couldn't stop texting. One clean title later, I was the proud owner of history itself, a hand-hewn cabin built before the valley even had paved roads. 3 days into renovations, while I was prying out rotten porch boards, the piece shattered again. A white Escalade rolled up like it was leading a parade. Out climbed Delilah Thornwick, president of the Birchwood Estates Homeowners Association. Her smile had the warmth of a frostbite warning. "Mr. Holloway," she began, "there's been a misunderstanding. This land was always intended for my family. My son was supposed to inherit it." I showed her the deed. County sealed, fully legal. She scanned it like it was a fake ID. "Well," she said, "perhaps you'll come to understand that our community has standards." The way she said standards made me feel like she was measuring the dirt on my boots. Then she turned, heels clicking like gunfire, and drove off in a storm of dust and perfume. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about property lines. It was about power. Week 2 started with a call from the county office. "Mr. Holloway, your renovation permits appear to have been misplaced." Right. Misplaced. A few days later, a building inspector showed up, clipboard in hand. He cited me for everything from unauthorized restoration to improper waste disposal. $2,000 in fines. Work stopped immediately. I stood in the quiet afterward, surrounded by sawdust, feeling that old, familiar knot of frustration tighten in my chest. That's when I remembered something my grandfather used to say: when someone cheats, they're usually hiding bigger lies. So I went digging. The county archives smelled like dust and secrets. 3 hours later, I found the first crack in their story. The cabin was built in 1873, but zoning laws didn't even exist until 1962. That meant the property couldn't legally fall under modern restrictions. Still, I needed proof. Enter Eleanor Vasquez, a sharp-minded attorney whose office sat above the local hardware store. She looked over my paperwork with a smirk. "Marcus, your cabin predates modern zoning by nearly a century," she said. "They can't regulate what didn't exist back then. You're standing on grandfathered ground, literally." When she said those words, I felt something I hadn't in months: hope. But Delilah wasn't giving up. That weekend, her Escalade appeared again at my gate. Camera in hand, she started photographing my property like it was a crime scene. "Just documenting maintenance concerns," she called out sweetly. "Ma'am, this isn't under your HOA jurisdiction," I reminded her. "Oh, everything in Birchwood Valley affects the community," she replied. "Especially when undesirable elements move in." That word, undesirable, hit harder than any fine. She climbed into her SUV, rolled down the window, and added, "I'd be careful about that burn pile. Anonymous tips can be inconvenient." The moment she drove off, I knew this was war. By week 3, it was full-blown siege. I wasn't invited to the HOA's emergency meeting, but Eleanor told me, public notice means public meeting. So I showed up. Delilah stood at the podium with a PowerPoint titled, "Property Value Threats in Our Community." The first slide? My cabin. Crooked photo, bad lighting, looked like a crime documentary. "This unregulated construction," she told the crowd, "poses safety risks and could attract transient elements." The crowd murmured. Then, from the front row, an older woman raised her hand. "Didn't that cabin belong to the original settlers?" she asked. "Shouldn't we be preserving history?" Delilah's smile froze. "Historical sentiment doesn't override modern standards," she said. That's when I stood up. Since you're discussing my property, I said calmly, maybe I should clarify a few things. Every head turned. And right then, Eleanor entered. Perfect timing. She walked to the front, opened her briefcase, and pulled out the HOA's founding documents. According to these, she said, Mr. Holloway's land has never been part of this HOA's jurisdiction. In fact, the previous owner was illegally charged fees for 17 years. The room went silent, the kind of silence that means someone just lost their crown. Delilah's husband tried to argue, but Eleanor wasn't done. This pattern of harassment has legal consequences, she said evenly. I suggest this board corrects its overreach before it becomes a court case. The meeting ended in chaos. But for the first time, the crowd wasn't behind Delilah, they were looking at me with quiet respect. I'd like to say that ended it. But power doesn't surrender gracefully. The next morning, construction trucks blocked my driveway. Emergency water repairs, Delilah's husband told me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My water pressure dropped to nothing for 3 days. Then came anonymous insurance complaints, canceled deliveries, and late-night car surveillance, her son circling the property, snapping photos like some suburban spy. Even the police chief came by. I'm getting pressure to investigate you, she said quietly. But I know what this is, organized harassment. Keep records, Marcus. So I did. Every call, every photo, every petty game, all documented. Then, fate stepped in. While repairing a sagging floor beam in the basement, my crowbar hit hollow stone. Behind it was a small cavity holding a leather-wrapped bundle. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air as I unwrapped it. Inside were territorial documents dated September 15, 1873, signed and sealed by the governor himself. It granted the surrounding valley land to Ezekiel Holloway and his heirs, in perpetuity. My great-great-grandfather. I sat there on the floor, heart pounding. Not only was I the legal owner, my family had built this valley. Eleanor verified the document's authenticity. Marcus, she said, voice soft with disbelief, this isn't just proof of ownership. This is the original land grant for half the valley. We filed everything with the county recorder's office. Within a week, Delilah's campaign collapsed. The Thornwicks faced an investigation into fraudulent HOA collections. The inspector who fined me was quietly reassigned. And those neighbors who once avoided me? They started waving from their porches. The day the county certified my land grant, I stood on the rebuilt porch, feeling the late autumn wind roll down the valley. The scent of pine and wood smoke carried something new, peace. Delilah's house went up for sale a month later. The sign said, reduced price. Looking back now, I think about what my grandfather wrote, build something that matters. Turns out, what I built wasn't just a cabin. It was a legacy reclaimed, a truth dug out of the dirt, and a reminder that history doesn't always belong to the loudest voices, sometimes it belongs to the quiet persistence of people who refuse to be bullied. So if you're out there fighting your own version of a Delilah, remember, keep your documents, trust your hands, and never let anyone tell you what you've earned. Because sometimes, the past really does have your back.